Okay, there we go. All righty then. Well then, Mr. Chafin, and co-counsel, it's your motion. Y'all go ahead and proceed.
Ma'am, we'll call Mr. Freddie Hill Jr., please.
Freddie Hill Jr.
So if you would raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Good morning, Mr. Hill. Can you introduce yourself to Judge Dalton, please?
How you doing? My name is Freddie Hill.
And you're Freddie Hill Jr., is that right?
Yes, ma'am. Freddie Hill Jr.
And could you spell your first name for our court reporter here?
F-R-E-D-D-I-E.
Thank you. So, Mr. Hill, how do you know Devonte Hill?
My son.
Where was Devonte born?
Here in Nashville. At Harry.
Okay. And if you'll maybe speak just a little
Yes,
bit closer to the microphone.
scoot your chair forward a little bit, that we can get a little closer to the microphone, and then if you could speak up for us. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Do you remember when Devonte was born? What's his birthday?
7/7/99.
So that makes him he'll be 23 in July?
Yes.
When Devonte was first born, did he live with you?
Yes, he did.
And did his mother live there too?
She was there for like 3 months, and then she got sent away, and he was with me then.
And when you say sent away, do you mean she was arrested?
Yes, she was arrested, and he was with me for a year.
Okay. And is his mother present in court today?
No.
So other than that 3 months that y'all lived together, was there any other time that the three of y'all lived together?
No other time.
And at some point, did Devonte's grandmother become his primary caregiver?
Yes, when his mother got out, she picked him up, and his grandmother was the caretaker, definitely.
And we'll talk more in a minute about kind of where you were during this time period as well. But first, I want to make sure we understand all of Devonte's family. Does he have any other siblings that are both your child and his mother's child?
Yes, he has an older sister, Frederica, and a younger sister, Antiochia.
Okay. And do you have any other children other than those children?
Yes, I do. I have Sierra, Lily, Frederica, Quandrica, and Freddie the third, and my baby girl, which is Treasure.
And does Devonte's mother, to your knowledge, does Devonte's mother have other children not with you?
Yes, she does.
Okay. Do you know how many other siblings he has by his mother?
I just know their names.
Okay.
Quanisha, Brianna, one called Papa Ray Travin, and little Joe Aquarius, and his last sister, I can't think of her name, but I know all of them.
Okay. Do all of those siblings live here in Davidson County?
Yes, they do.
Okay. And does Devonte have any significant family members in his life who live anywhere other than here in Nashville?
No, he does not. Not to my knowledge.
You live here in Nashville?
Yes, I live in Nashville.
Where in Nashville do you live?
Right here in East Nashville, over on South 8th Street, South 8th.
All right. I want to talk a little bit about before Mr. Hill was arrested in this case, what he was doing. Was he working, to your knowledge?
Working and with his kids, because he just had some kids, so
Okay.
that's what I saw.
So was he in a relationship with the mother of his children?
Yes, he was with her.
Staying with her?
From his house to her house.
Okay. And how many children do they have?
2.
And how old are those children?
He's 2 years old, and his daughter is like a year and a couple of months old.
Okay. So had his daughter just been born right
Yes.
before he was arrested?
Yes, she was.
Was he working? You said he was working. Do you remember what kind of work he was doing?
It was restaurant work.
Okay. And in what part of town? Do you remember?
East Nashville, right up the street from me.
Okay. Since Devonte has been in custody, have you had regular contact with the mother of his children?
Not too much contact with her, but I do get to see my grandkids when they're over to Devonte's mother's house.
What has Devonte missed in the last year that he's been in custody with his children?
Birthday and the interaction that his kids have with my other grandkids.
You mentioned a number of siblings. Does Devonte have good relationships with his siblings? Does he see them often, talk to them often?
Yes, yes, he do.
And is, to your knowledge, has Devonte ever traveled anywhere outside of the state of Tennessee?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Ever been on an airplane?
No.
Does he have a passport?
No.
Okay. So, Mr. Hill, I want to talk to you now about a little bit more about Devonte's childhood and adolescence. I know this court is familiar with a concept called adverse childhood experiences, but I'd like to talk to you sort of more basically about things that happened to Devonte as he was growing up. And the first thing I want to talk about, even though I know it's going to be difficult, is your own involvement in the criminal legal system. Okay. Before Devonte was born, had you been arrested?
Yes.
In fact, before he was born, had you been arrested and convicted of a couple of robbery charges?
Yes, I was.
And one of those, some aggravated robberies in 1993, you had to serve some time in prison.
Yes, I did.
How long did you serve in prison?
It was from 91 up until I think 93, and then I got out and went right back for another robbery.
Okay. And how long, when you went right back, how long were you in that?
From 1993 to 98.
And you mentioned Devonte was born in 1999, so you were out during that time.
Right.
Did you end up going back to jail or prison after Devonte was born?
Yes, I went back in 2002.
And so Devonte would have been about 3 years old then?
Yes.
Was that for a charge that started with an assault charge, but you ended up getting charged with, for a period of time, an attempted homicide involving a police officer, an interaction with a police officer?
Yes, it was.
Now, you weren't convicted of those charges in state court, but did the federal government prosecute you in that case?
Yes, felony possession of a firearm.
Okay. And so you ended up, did you end up having a trial in that case?
Yes, I went to trial.
And were you found guilty?
Found guilty.
Okay. How much time did you serve in that case?
2002 to 2007.
And were you released on parole in 2007?
It was probation sent to a halfway house.
Okay. You had then pretty shortly thereafter you were arrested for a felony drug sale in 2008.
Yes, I was.
Okay. How long did you end up serving in that case?
They gave me probation because I didn't do the actual sale in that case, so I got probation and was released.
Okay. Did you end up violating that probation and going back to prison on that sentence?
Yes, I violated and went back for 11 months.
Okay. And how old was Devonte around that time? So that's you went back in 2011. Would he have been about 11 or 12 then?
I believe so, but I didn't get to see him as much because I was doing so many different things, you know. And like every time I got out, he would come to me, and I wouldn't be there long enough for him to really get to know me at the time.
To build a relationship. Yeah. That sentence that you ended up serving that you finished up, was that the last time that you were in prison?
I think so. If not, I went back like on a violation. I think that was it.
Okay. Now you had another in 2014, you had another drug case that was charged as a felony, but pled down to simple possession. Does that sound right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And you were, I think you mentioned that was the point that you were doing that 11 months on the
For the violation.
the violation. Okay. How old was Devonte then?
He was going to Stratford at the time.
Okay.
It was
Sound
13,
14 or 15, yeah. So in fact, was Devonte's first contact with the juvenile justice system while you were locked up on that case? The first time he got charged
Yes.
with anything?
Yes.
I want to talk a little bit more about Devonte's involvement with the juvenile system in just a minute. First, let me back up. Those cases that we've talked about, were those the only times that you were arrested, or have there been other charges that have been dismissed or misdemeanors that did not result in significant jail time along the way too?
Yes, I've had a couple of cases dismissed.
So some domestic assault charges, some driver's license charges, things like that. Does that sound right?
Verbal assault.
Since you were released when Devonte was about 15, what have you been doing with your life?
Working, trying to just work and try to build a relationship with Devonte and my other kids because I've been known out of their lives for so long.
Where have you been working?
First, I was at Jiffy Lube, CSA, customer associate,
Okay.
and lately maintenance man,
Okay. And where are you a maintenance man?
Shelby Street,
Okay. At the MDHA housing that's over.
Case Homes.
Okay. And as part of your job responsibilities over there, do you actually manage or supervise other employees or work with other employees?
Yes, I train a lot of different guys to do maintenance work.
How long have you been in that role?
3 years.
So Mr. Hill, do you think throughout Devonte's childhood and adolescence, you were able to be a consistent presence for him?
No,
Why not?
because I was in and out of prison. So
How do you think that affected Devonte?
I'm not sure because he'd come every time I'm out. He would come and be with me, and then I took away again. You know, so I never really got to talk to him about that situation.
Before I move on, I just want to clarify for the court, in case anybody is sort of following along on CJIS, there is confusion about whose charges are whose. Mr. Freddie Hill Jr. So the way that we were able to identify is actually to use his date of birth along with his name, just to be clear. And your date of birth is 1/31.
1971.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hill. Okay, so I want to talk now about what you know of Devonte's involvement with the juvenile justice system. We mentioned the first time he got arrested was 2014 while you were in custody. Is that right?
Yes.
That would have been the day after his 15th birthday. Maybe this goes without saying, but were you there to celebrate his 15th birthday with him that year?
No, I was not.
Do you know if he had to spend any time at the detention center for that arrest?
That I'm not sure because I was not there.
He had that same year, some misdemeanor shoplifting charges while he was 15. Would you have still been in custody during that period of time?
Yes.
So you wouldn't have gone to any of his juvenile court dates or talked with the judge or anybody about what was going on with him during that time. And you wouldn't know if he had to spend any time in detention after any of those arrests.
No.
He failed to show up for court in juvenile court in March of 2015. Would you have any idea why he didn't show up for court?
No, I'm not sure.
To your knowledge, who was he living with at that time?
His grandmother and his mother and siblings.
So we know also in the spring of 2016, when Devonte was 16, Devonte shot his grandmother, and one of his sisters was also struck in that incident. They thankfully both survived. Is this the same grandmother that we've been talking about who raised Devonte?
Yes.
Is she your mother, or is she his mother's mother?
His mother's mother.
During 2016, were you over at the house or spending much time with that side of the family to kind of know what was going on in the house at that time?
Not too much, but I would get calls to like go to the school, talk, and come and talk to him.
Okay. Did Devonte stay in detention after he was arrested for that?
Yes, yes he did.
How long was he there?
I'm not sure, but I think about a year.
Did you visit him while he was there during that time?
I can. Yes, I can.
Did you go to court dates or meetings with DCS or anything during that time?
I went once with his mom, and it's just we clashed too much.
Okay. So his mom was primarily the one who was kind of mom and grandmother would have been.
But grandma was in the hospital, and she got out, and she was missing. She was there all the time.
Okay. Did you have the opportunity occasionally, though, to talk to Devonte during that period of time?
Yes, I talked to him, but
to your memory, did he have any sort of emotional reaction to what had happened?
I could tell he was hurt by what he done, but we never really just talked about it because we're kind of like, we don't talk so much about certain things.
You don't talk about your feelings. Okay. Is Devonte's grandmother still alive?
No, she's not now.
Okay. Not as a result of the shooting?
No.
Okay. When did she pass away?
I'm not sure. About 2, maybe 3 years ago, I believe.
And based on your memory, was she supportive of Devonte being released from custody in that case?
She didn't want him locked up.
So he was released, and then shortly thereafter, he got a drug charge, a theft charge, and was convicted of committing an aggravated robbery. So that would have been just shortly before his 18th birthday. Do you remember that?
I think, yes, I do.
And those charges ended up sending Devonte to Woodland Hills.
Yeah.
Do you remember him being in Woodland Hills?
Yes, I do.
Did you visit him there?
I don't think I got a chance to go very much because of my job.
Okay. And do you remember how much time he did at Woodland Hills?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that.
So in addition to the incarceration that Devonte experienced, in addition to your involvement with the criminal legal system that had you in and out of his life, did anything else traumatic happen to Devonte as a child?
Well, I know when I was incarcerated, I was looking at the news, Justice Center, and some dogs had chased and bit on a child, and it was Devonte, and he was real young. So I don't know.
Do you know what his injuries were from that attack?
He had to have plastic surgery, like on his back and his rear end.
You said he was real young. I mean, how young are we talking?
Had to be like maybe 3 or 4 years old.
Okay, so a young child. How about the death of his grandmother that raised him? How did that affect him?
We don't talk about it, but I know it's it's a big burden on it. I know
It's a significant loss in his life.
very.
Do you know if he experienced the deaths of any other close friends or family members?
I know a close friend. Yeah, a real close friend just passed a couple years ago too.
Mr. Hill, do you know whether Devonte was ever affiliated with a gang?
Yes, I knew he was affiliated, but I never seen him like you know how the guys hang out on the block, and I never see that.
Okay. Had you seen that in the past? You don't see that now, or you never saw him doing activities like that?
No, never seen him do activities like that because a lot of things were kept from me, you know.
Okay. What gang was he affiliated with?
Crips.
I want to talk now about what happens with Devonte when he gets out of Woodland Hills. Did he earn his high school diploma?
Yes, he did.
And did he actually earn his high school diploma while he was in custody?
Yes, at Woodland Hills. Yes.
Did he get to the walk graduation stage?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
I believe so. I wasn't there, but I believe it was not.
From you mentioned Stratford. From Stratford.
Stratford.
Okay. And you've told us that you and Devonte don't talk much about feelings. Have you ever had a conversation about how much you were absent during his childhood or how that impacted him?
No, we never talked about it. Just, I wanted to be around him, he wanted to be around me, and that's what he always did that. And that was enough.
What efforts in the last couple of years, though, have you made to try to connect with Devonte and to build that relationship with him?
Well, me and his older brother, Freddie, we all would get together and ride and, go places and see the kids. Like, they just got their new sister. And so, yeah, we try to become family oriented.
Okay. Does Freddie have kids?
Yes, he does.
So getting their children together to play with their cousins, that sort of thing.
Yes.
So have you seen Devonte interact with his children, take care of his children?
Oh, yes, I have. Yeah, he babysits. When he wasn't working, and like on the weekends, he would have his son with him, no matter what.
What kind of dad is he?
He's a good dad. He, not loud with him or nothing like that. He plays with him and eats him a lot of junk.
Spoils him?
Yes.
Now, we had this discussion just a second ago. He's been affiliated with the gang in the past, but to your knowledge, in the last couple of years that you've been around Devonte more, have you seen him participating in any gang-related activities?
No, I have not.
Okay. And would you describe, based on your interactions with him before he went to Woodland Hills and after he got out, would you describe any difference in who he is as a person?
Just the kids changed him. It made him more of a calm guy, cool, and just wanted to be around, I guess, family more. Because he was coming around my mother, me, and sisters just on my side.
So talking about how this change that you've seen, him becoming family oriented, how did you first learn that Devonte had been arrested for this crime?
My brother called me while I was at work and told me turn on the news, and that's how I found out.
Was that a surprise to you?
Yes.
Okay.
Very surprising.
Why?
Because he had changed so much from the incident, with his grandmother, and he just wasn't doing it. All I saw was him with his kids, him with my older son Freddie, and just doing things like that and working. I didn't expect that.
I want to finish up talking about what Devonte would do, where he would live, if he were able to post bail and get out. Do you know if he has any money saved up for bail?
He has a little, and he has family. He has everybody.
So y'all would be helping him?
Yes.
Okay. Is there an amount of bond you think the family could make?
I'm not sure right now, but we'll try whatever we can.
Could y'all make $100,000 bond?
Yes, I believe. Yes.
Okay. Does Devonte own a house or a car?
No, it does not.
Does he have, any stocks or trust funds or anything like that that would help him post his bail?
Not to my knowledge.
You mentioned he doesn't have a passport, right?
No.
What's the furthest that you know that Devonte's ever been away from Nashville?
I'm not sure. I ain't never known him to leave Nashville.
Would he get a job if he was released?
Yes. Yes, he would.
What type of work would he be doing?
The restaurant. I don't know if he like washing dishes or cooking. I don't know which one it is, but restaurant.
And that's the type of work that he's been doing in the past. And where could Devonte live if he was released?
Me or his kid's mother, Soraya.
And you mentioned that you live just over the river in East Nashville. Where does she live? Just generally, we don't have to give her a
Hermitage.
In Hermitage.
Yes.
Okay. Is there anyone else here today with you in support of Devonte?
No.
If I could have just a minute, please, Your Honor. Those are my questions.
Okay, General Norman?
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Hill, you said that you haven't known your son to leave the Nashville area. Is that correct?
Yes, that's my knowledge.
Okay. Did you attend the preliminary hearing for the homicide?
Yes.
You were here.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so do you remember Detective Dickerson testifying about what your son said to him in the interview?
I can't remember. Sorry.
Okay, because part of the facts of this case are that your son told Detective Dickerson that he had traveled to Atlanta in the days prior to the homicide.
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, so if that's true, you're saying that you have no idea that your son's ever left the Nashville area?
Right, never.
Okay, but if he admitted to the detective that he went to Atlanta a few days before, you would agree that your son has left the Nashville area, correct?
If he said it to him, I guess so, but not to my knowledge. Yeah.
Okay, and the vehicle that your son was in when he shot Caitlin Kaufman, that Cadillac was rented out of the state of Florida. Were you aware of that?
No, it's not.
Okay. And what about James Cowan? What do you know about him? He goes by the nickname Duty?
Right. I don't, I know him through his mother and him, but I don't know, like being around him or nothing like that. I don't hang with him.
So you do know Mr. Cowan,
Yes, I know.
and you know that he's a Crip gang member, just like your son, correct?
Yes,
And he is a drug dealer.
yes, okay. Yeah, yes, I saw that.
Okay. And your son also sells drugs. Did you know that?
No,
Mr. Hill, you're under oath today. Are you
Right.
sure that you're not aware of the fact that your son sells drugs?
no, as far as drugs go, I found out something else, he's music.
I'm sorry?
Music-wise. So that's what I thought his thing was music, working and doing his music.
Okay. And so you don't remember Detective Gish testifying about the text messages from your son's cell phone? And that he was selling drugs prior to murdering Caitlin Kaufman as well as after murdering Caitlin Kaufman?
I remember that. I do remember that.
Okay, because right after he murdered Caitlin Kaufman, he ordered a pizza.
To the form of the question, where if we could just ask the questions and not add the tagline before he murdered Caitlin Kaufman.
I'll
because
sustain
he
the
was
objection.
innocent.
I'll sustain the objection.
So you do remember that, Mr. Hill, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So you agree that your son is a drug dealer, correct?
Yes. Yes, from what they said was text message, I have no choice but to.
Right, because he was selling drugs and he was also getting guns. That was a regular activity for him. You don't remember the text messages asking about getting a new gun right after the murder?
Oh, I remember that. Yeah, I thought she was asking me like, do I know about the? No. But yeah, I know what you're saying about the text message.
Okay. And you said that the plan would be for him to live with you potentially, correct?
He could live with me. Yes, ma'am.
And where do you live?
I live Sylvan Street, South 8, Kirkpatrick Apartments.
Who all lives there?
Just me and my girlfriend,
What's your girlfriend's name?
Denise Brick.
I'm sorry?
Denise Brick.
Could you spell the first name and last name for our court reporter, please?
Denise and last name Britt.
Okay. And you said those are the only two people that live there, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And the other option you referenced was the mother of Mr. Hill's child, is that right?
Yes.
And who's that?
Soraya. I don't know her last name. I don't really know too much about her. Just the kids.
So her name's Soraya, but that's the only information that we have.
Yes, ma'am. That's all I know is the first name.
Okay, and she's not here today, is that correct?
No, she's not here. She's not here.
Okay. And Miss Erlene Hill, that is Mr. Hill's grandmother, is that right?
Yes.
And did you say that that's his mother's mother?
Yes.
Okay, and she's passed away.
Yes, ma'am.
And you are aware that all of his prior convictions, the attempted homicide where he shot his grandmother, and was one of the other children shot as well?
Yes, ma'am.
Were they both shot?
Yes, ma'am. Two.
The 12-year-old and the 6-year-old?
Yes, ma'am.
And that was because Mr. Hill didn't want to go to school that day.
Yeah, and for my daughter, she was hanging with guys and up all night, and I guess they was, you know, I like keep pressure, telling you to do something, and I don't know what happened. You know, they just said he didn't look the same.
But then he shot his grandmother and his siblings.
Yes.
And that happened at 1500 Porter Road, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And that's where he was actually taken into custody for this case.
Yes.
And then the original theft before that, I guess his first charge, that was a theft from his grandmother that happened at Porter Road. And then the last case where he was charged with aggravated robbery, that also happened at Porter Road. And that was when he robbed a Domino's delivery driver
Oh,
with a gun.
before he shot his grandmother?
No, after he shot his
Oh,
grandmother.
okay.
After.
I didn't know. Honestly, I didn't know about that.
Okay. I don't think I have any other questions. Thank you.
Okay, anything to read or write?
No, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Watch your step as you're stepping down. You can put your feet up. Thank you, sir. Watch your step. Okay, Ms. Sims, Ms. James.
Yeah, those are our witnesses.
Okay, thank you. General?
Judge, the state would submit the recording of the preliminary hearing. Mr. Hill's record is included in the state's discovery response, but I do have a copy of his juvenile record as well as his adult criminal record.
Okay, the preliminary hearing recording will be exhibit number 1. And the juvenile record will be filed under seal. And the court will review his adult record, which is also under seal, if I'm not mistaken, is that right? Is it still under seal?
I think so.
I don't believe he has an adult record, but
Okay, all right. Any other proof from the state?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, well, obviously I've got to listen to the recording before I issue an order. Does either side wish to make a very, very extremely brief closing argument? Very, very, very extremely brief.
I hear you. And, Your Honor, I would like to, if there's no objection from the state, introduce a copy of the witness that testified at the preliminary hearing, gave about a 4.5-hour statement to the police. I'd like to introduce a copy of the.
Is that the transcript?
It is. I don't have a copy for the state, but I will get her one. Or we can late file the recording, which the state does have, whichever the court would prefer.
Well, I mean, I can take the written, that way I can go ahead and start reviewing it.
And I can email it to Ms. Norman, like,
Okay,
immediately.
that'll be exhibit number 3. And I think we're filing everything under seal, is that right? I think that was what y'all,
the discovery from the state's been filed under seal. and
okay,
We're not opposed to that.
okay. All right.
So you want everything in this one?
Your Honor, based on our review of individuals charged with criminal homicide warrants beginning in general sessions and bound over to the grand jury in the last 2 years. Mr. Hill is one of 17 out of 80 individuals who do not have a bond. It is unusual in this jurisdiction that individuals be held without bond, even on serious cases. And the court well knows the inquiry the court must go through in order to order detention. Okay? This is covered in Hill versus Hall, which I know the court is familiar with. It is covered in U.S. v. Salerno. It is covered in Torres v. Collins. Mr. Hill has a due process right, both substantively and procedurally, to due process, to be heard, and for the court to make specific individualized findings as to both whether or not the state has proven by clear and convincing evidence that he should be detained. That's the standard. It is not our burden to show that he should not. We start with a presumption that everyone in Tennessee is entitled to bail. The Constitution, our Tennessee Constitution says the only time we hold somebody who's presumed innocent without bail is if that person is charged with a capital offense. And at the preliminary hearing, the state filed a motion, a written motion, requesting Mr. Hill be held with no bond, citing that this case could qualify as a capital offense, and citing TCA 4011-102 as authority. And that statute also, again, includes the presumption that all defendants are presumed bailable. And that filing was the first and the last time the state has ever suggested that there will be capital charges filed in this case. And he has been in jail for 15 months. And while that arguably disingenuous threat worked on the General Sessions Court, we are here now asking this court to go through the legal analysis that is required to make an individualized determination here. Again, the burden is on the state to prove that no condition, no combination of release conditions can both ensure Mr. Hill's presence at trial and the safety of the public, right? That is the purpose of bond. Yes, we've put on proof. Yes, we have an argument. But unless and until the state proves by clear and convincing evidence, he is guaranteed his liberty. And they have failed to meet that burden today, Your Honor. The court is familiar with the TCA factors that you must go through. I will not belabor those factors, other than to say, again, if the court does not see Mr. Hill as appropriate for ROR, which I assume based on the mixed nature of the factors there, the court will not find him an appropriate candidate for ROR. The next step is to look at alternative conditions before we get to money bail. And if we are concerned about the safety of the public, and we are concerned about Mr. Hill's appearance in court, which again is the purpose of bail, there are conditions much more appropriate than money to ensure those things. For example, house arrest, GPS monitoring. It would allow us to know where Mr. Hill is, to track him, add, that all firearms must be removed from the home, add searches, random searches of the home. I mean, things that the Davidson County pretrial services office can do. Those types of conditions are much more likely to keep the public safe and to ensure that we know where Mr. Hill is than any amount of money bail would. Mr. Hill is not a wealthy man. While the family might be able to scrape together enough money to post a $100,000 bail, we've heard, he's not traveled outside of the state of Tennessee. Now, the state asked Mr. Hill's father about this admission of going to Atlanta. I think in the context of what you'll hear in the preliminary hearing, that was the excuse that Mr. Hill gave about where he was when Ms. Kaufman was killed. So I would submit that that was not truthful on Mr. Hill's part, that he had actually been to Atlanta. So I don't think we should consider that as to whether or not he's actually traveled out of the state. I want to spend just a minute talking about the idea of danger to the community. I predict that Ms. Norman will probably focus most of her argument on Mr. Hill's record, on his times that he has been involved with firearms, and perhaps about the randomness and the senselessness of Ms. Kaufman's death. And I do not minimize the pain that Ms. Kaufman's family has endured by any means. But I want us to be very careful in how we are using danger to the community as a factor. Because day after day in North Nashville, in James Casey, in University Court, innocent people are injured and die in gun violence. And the vast majority, as we see from our CJIS search, of those folks get bonds. So let's be really careful that we are not suggesting that Mr. Hill is more dangerous because the allegations here veer across I-40 into a wealthy white neighborhood, as opposed to where we see most of the gun violence here in Nashville. Because the lives of poor people of color in this city are just as valuable. Their family's pain is just as significant. And the danger to the community there is no less real, but we see it appropriate to set bail because we follow the law in those cases, and we have to follow the law in this case too. Finally, Your Honor, as to the factor regarding the likelihood of conviction, which is another thing that the court must consider, and I know the court hasn't listened to the preliminary hearing yet. Just a couple of things I want the court to consider. Number one, the proof at the preliminary hearing that places the gun in Mr. Hill's hand and Mr. Hill in the car are two different levels of proof. Mr. Hill is in the car by his admission and by the cell phone evidence that was testified to at the preliminary hearing. The only evidence that puts the gun in Mr. Hill's hand is the testimony of the individual who testified at the preliminary hearing, we were not allowed to name that person out loud in the preliminary hearing. That is the person whose transcript you now have of his interview. And what you will see is that he spent 4 hours lying to the police about his involvement, his knowledge, and it turns out he had the gun that shot Caitlin Kaufman in his possession for the entire 4 hours, and only until he was guaranteed he was saving his own skin did he give that gun up and finger Mr. Hill. So credibility is significant here to consider whether or not Mr. Hill is convicted. This is not a situation where we're talking about felony murder and equal culpability of all parties in the car. This is a situation where the state's theory requires you to believe beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Hill is the shooter, and the only proof that Your Honor will hear in that preliminary hearing is from this individual who is now incarcerated. Your Honor, secondly, even if that gun was in Mr. Hill's hand, the other proof you're going to hear is that this was a road rage incident. That is very different than the proof required for premeditated first-degree murder, which is the state's theory at this point. And so I'm asking the court to carefully consider what the proof as to the actual charge and the likelihood of conviction of first-degree murder, even if the court finds the testimony of the individual to be persuasive. And I think as you look at his interview with the police versus what he says in the preliminary hearing, it will be hard to find him credible. Again, Your Honor, we are asking here to set a reasonable bail, a bail that the family can make, to do that through an individualized determination following the law, and that only if the court finds the state has met by clear and convincing evidence proof that Mr. Hill should be detained. That is the only circumstance in which no bail should be set. Again, a house arrest, GPS monitoring, search of the home to make sure that all firearms have been removed, those types of conditions are much more likely to ensure Mr. Hill's presence in court and the safety of the public. Thank you.
Okay. General Norman?
Your Honor, the state submits that the court can make that determination of whether or not the defendant should be detained without bail, as well as what the appropriate amount of bail should be if the court determines that one should be set. But the state submits that based on Mr. Hill's conduct as well as his criminal record, that amount should be fairly high compared to other cases. His prior criminal record of shooting at his own family members, shooting at children, and then after that committing an armed robbery of a pizza driver. Those are the that's the prior conduct that leads up to this, as well as the testimony that's been submitted to Your Honor to consider from the preliminary hearing, was that Mr. Hill was ongoing as a drug dealer. That was the way that Mr. Hill made money, was by selling drugs. That he associated himself with known Crip gang members. They were his very best friend, that his life was gangs and drugs. His own statement to the detective is that he went to Atlanta trying to tell the detective he couldn't have committed this crime because he was in Atlanta. Now, the evidence in the case shows that Mr. Hill had been to Atlanta, but earlier that week, not that very day. The defense is alleging that somehow this has something to do with wealth or the color of someone's skin, which I submit that that has absolutely nothing to do with this case or nothing to do with the issue of whether or not bond should be set. The proof in the state's case, the witness testimony who the defense has submitted to you, he did not tell the police the entire truth. It was the moment that he actually messaged Mr. Hill. He sent text messages to Mr. Hill where Mr. Hill admitted his involvement in the shooting. It was at that moment where he knew that he could guarantee the police would not think he had any involvement because he had the gun that Mr. Hill had sold to him. That was the moment, and as soon as he got that confirmation from Mr. Hill, he goes and knocks on the door and asks the detectives to come back into the room and says, listen, I've got better for you. I've got better for you. I've got this statement from Mr. Hill. There is overwhelming evidence that Mr. Hill shot and killed Caitlin Kaufman. And because of that, he is very dangerous. The court should consider protecting all of the citizens of Davidson County, and having Mr. Hill released pending the trial in this matter would not protect the citizens of Davidson County because he is that dangerous. Thank you.
All right, as apparently I've got to listen to the preliminary hearing and review the transcript of the witness that was presented. This one will probably take me a little longer than normal with some of the other orders that I draft for bond, so exercise patience, please. All right, thank you. All righty then. Let's see, Ms. Dusenberry?
Yes, Your Honor.
Let me see. Let me put my face mask back on. Let's see, you represent Mr. Belgrave,
I do.
and that's for plea?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Where is Mr. Belgrave? Is he in
He's in the back.
custody? Okay, Mr. Bracy, can you get Mr. Belgrave? And while he's coming out, General Morris, did you find Mr. Wallace?
Apparently he's very busy elsewhere, Judge.
Wow.
So he would like a new date. So I got all dressed up just for you today, not for Mr. Wall.
No. What about May 11th?
Can we do the next week? I'll be out of town.
May 18th?
Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, good morning, Mr. Belgrave.
Good morning.
Okay. Raise your right hand, please. You need time to break down? You need time to break down? Okay. Just give me a few minutes. Get my good side. Pass the hand. Raise your right hand.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Okay, good morning, Mr. Belgrave.
Good morning.
All right, let me take this down so that you can hear me a little better. All right, you have the right to plead not guilty to any offense charged against you and to persist in that plea. If you choose to plead not guilty, the Constitution guarantees you the right to a speedy and public trial by jury. Do you understand that?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you speak up? You're really soft-spoken.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, you have the right to see, hear, and cross-examine all witnesses against you. You have the right to use the power and process of the court to compel the production of any evidence, including the attendance of any witnesses in your favor. Do you understand that?
Yes, ma'am.
You have the right to have the assistance of an attorney at all stages of the proceedings. You have the right to remain silent and not testify. Remaining silent cannot be used against you. Do you understand that?
Yes, ma'am.
If you choose to enter a plea of guilty in this case today, you will be giving up all of the rights that I just explained as it relates to this case. Do you understand that?
Yes, ma'am.
If you're not a citizen of the United States, entering into this plea agreement could result in you being deported. That only applies if you're not a citizen of the United States. Do you understand that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, speak up, you're soft
Yes,
spoken.
ma'am.
Okay. Okay, you need to make sure that you've completely paid off in full all of your court costs and any assessed fines no later than 1 year from today. Failure to do so could result in the loss of your driver's license. Do you understand that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, you're charged in this indictment in count 1 with, attempt to induce a sexual act by a minor?
Attempted solicitation.
Oh, okay.
By a minor.
Oh,